Well, welcome to our meeting. After a few interviews with you, OUCH, the Organized Union for Critical Healthcare, we've determined a few of our critical matrix ideas and things that are important to your association. So we discussed your day-to-day operations as being automated information systems, support for tracking and controlling information that includes admitting and releasing patients, administering medications, scheduling surgeries, feeding patients, tracking traffic to and from the hospital morgue, and various other information for doctors, nurses, and staff. So this is your information that we discussed, and this is how we determine our information through our talks. So first thing, we'll go over our critical information and what we decided to pick out of the information after we discussed with you. And that was admissions and billing. This is everything from your purchase, actually your customer's purchasing of healthcare. So you want to get your money in, and the admissions, everything from when he comes in and taking his order, scheduling him, that kind of thing. Next was medications. This is the feeding, the dosing, how much, things like that. Who gave it, the availability of it, things of that nature. Surgery schedule, when you're getting your surgery. The other one was feeding. Similar to medications is who's giving the food, what type of food it is, what the allergies to the food are, things of that nature. Employee records are exactly that, the records of your employees only. So everything from your employee's salary, the diseases they may have, medical conditions, things of that nature. And the last one is patient records, similar to employee records, but they're for your patients. So these, once again, are going to have the allergies that they're going to have, social security numbers, that kind of information. So from that, we put it into our organizational information criticality matrix. And we rated them from medium, high, and low. And we define our medium, high, and low over here as high being your loss of life, a malpractice suit, or permanent and serious injury. So that is your high. Medium is your embarrassment, a monetary loss, or serious injury. We didn't put an exact amount for monetary loss, but we're saying in a hospital environment, any type of money is a medium thing. And finally, our low is just a patient and or employee inconvenience. Nobody's going to get hurt, no money lost, just a simple inconvenience of, I'm sorry, you might be delayed, or took time out of my day for this. So that is when we come over to our organizational information criticality matrix. And so for admissions, for our confidentiality, do you want us to go into detail on this?
A little bit.
Okay. So for admissions and our confidentiality, we decided it was medium. If we go over here for medium, it's an embarrassment, a monetary loss, or serious injury. So for admitting a patient, it could possibly be embarrassing if you know why they're admitting them. That could lead, if you let that information out, could lead to a monetary loss due to not following HIPAA regulations and in other businesses, different types of federally mandated laws. If we go to the integrity of the information that you're admitting the patient for, if he came in for heart surgery and you admitted him for a broken leg or something, not a good sign. So that could lead to the loss of life. That might be a far chance to lose the leg instead, though. But so availability, the availability of the admission record, to know why he's there and what he's there for is very important. He could be in the middle of surgery, and if you don't really understand why he's there, he could die. So, and last is non-repudiation, knowing who assigned what. It's been the track all the way back to where it originated from, who was involved. And for the admitting, we didn't believe there was a loss of life that could happen through this. We didn't believe too much of an embarrassment or a monetary loss could happen because this is more of who assigned what, not what the actual assignment was, but who did it. So we didn't think there was much embarrassment or monetary loss to the hospital. It was mostly an inconvenience of not knowing what exactly the admitting patient was. So we can move down and we'll hit medication, go through all of them.
Just as examples.
Okay.
I have a quick question before we go forward. You added one on here, non-repudiation. What was your reasoning behind adding it?
The reason behind that was actually one of our team members, I'm not sure of his name, Chad, felt non-repudiation would be very important in a hospital setting. In particular because it's important to know what doctor was responsible for what. Who prescribed that medication? Why did he prescribe a certain amount? What team of surgeons came in? At what time did they come in? Just documenting everything that changed in a hospital setting was very important, and knowing who actually documented That way, when it ever came down to a loss of life, or anything like that, you would have somebody to fall back on.
Okay, thank you.
So that's kind of how all these originated. I'll skip down to maybe like a feeding one, which would be very similar to our medications because they're similar in their actual actions. So feeding, confidentiality for feeding. Not knowing what a certain person has to eat, what kind of diet. Well, we didn't think it'd be a loss of life if somebody found out that I had to eat pizza all day or else I would die. It's a little embarrassing that I had to eat pizza all the time or else I'd die. So that was the reason we gave it a medium. I don't think anybody's going to die if they found out that I had to eat pizza. For integrity, we did feel it was very high for the feeding because if you gave them a sandwich with peanut butter and it was supposed to be no peanuts and they were allergic to peanuts, it could really mess something up. So the integrity of the feeding is very important. Feeding them the right amount, not too much, very important. Availability of the feeding, of making sure that he's got food at a certain time, making sure if he's plugged in all I know is blood machine and lung machine. So if you're not given the right doses at the right times, things like that, the availability is very important. People could starve, people could die. And non-repudiation. This was important again because we thought this one would be higher than, say, admissions because the availability of the food. Sorry, not the availability. Knowing who fed him. Because it could be assigned by one doctor, but then it gets passed off to a nurse who actually does the feeding. And it's important to know in the chain of command where that may have gotten lost and where the mix-up may have occurred and why that mix-up may have occurred. And so this, again, wasn't going to lead to a loss of life, just knowing who was going to do the feeding, but it could lead to an embarrassment and a little more than an inconvenience. So we felt it would be put in the medium category. So that was our organizational information criticality matrix. Now from this, we determine your high water mark at ouch. And to do this, we take your first row of confidentiality. And we said everything's medium. Your highest mark in that category is a medium. So it's a medium. Simple enough. We go to integrity. The highest mark in our entire category is a high. So your high water mark for integrity is an H, high. For availability, once again, the highest mark in this entire category is high. So we mark it high. Finally, for non-repudiation. Our highest mark is a medium, so our high water mark is a medium for that category. So our entire high water mark is medium, high, high, medium for your organization, ouch.
How did you integrate HIPAA requirements into your definitions? Where do they?
HIPAA requirements came in mostly in the medium category as a monetary loss because through HIPAA you are forced to do fines, things of that nature. When we go into patient records, admissions and billing, it was very important to make sure we looked at HIPAA and the regulations that HIPAA may force upon us to maintain confidentiality of our records, of both patient and employee records. And those were really just coming in on the monetary loss. So through ouch and further discussion, we may decide that a certain monetary gain or loss should be moved to a higher category. But that's mostly where we got it from.
Okay.
And where HIPAA came in.
Any questions from over here?
I think your HIPAA regulations should have made confidentiality of employee and patient records a high and not a medium.
Well, the reason we didn't put HIPAA as a high on most of these things and do that is because we really said it was a loss of life. At the end of the world, is money what's going to determine if this person lives or not? It's pretty much going to be, if HIPAA just says you owe $100,000 because this guy had all this information released, we still thought the patient would live. He may be very embarrassed, very embarrassed. It may be a huge fine to the hospital, but in the end, he was still going to live. And we thought it was important that they lived, and we valued life over profit. And that's why we didn't choose that. But through further discussion, we may decide that HIPAA definitely does need to go higher.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. Do we as the company, which is me and this group over here, do you feel that the definition needs to be changed to address that concern?
I think it should.
Okay. So what would we like high to say? Loss of confidentiality of patient information.
Non-compliance with federal rules and regulations.
Okay, that'd be a broader one. Okay. Does the rest of Ouch agree?
It's definitely something we can discuss.
We will have discussions.
Well, this is a good place to discuss that change so that we can show a change process, right? Okay, so point is, if you get in with the customer, and yeah, you've done a lot of work ahead of time, but if you get in with the customer and you start to have these kind of discussions, can you make changes while you're having this discussion? The answer is absolutely yes. If there's consensus agreement among the customer, what you can do right now is take a pen and help. So go ahead and add up there non-compliance with regulatory requirements.
Oh man, my handwriting.
Amongst the teams, that needs to be a high risk.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the question.
Because I wouldn't say that just non-compliance with federal requirements is always going to be high. There may be instances when it's a medium or a low risk.
Right, my actual concern is that you're confusing high, medium, and low with non-compliant. I can still be compliant and be a medium.
Still be compliant, still be.
I can meet all of my federal regulations with a medium.
Okay, so right now we don't have a consensus. What would we like to see changed up here, if anything?
I mean, aren't these referencing how much protection we're trying to put in?
Well, this was supposed to be referencing the impact to the organization itself. If you lose confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and in your case, non-repudiation of the information, of this critical information. So the question is, do these definitions cover it? Understanding there really needs to be more granularity in any of these definitions that we do. But do we need to see a change here because you don't like what showed up over there? Or can we as an organization deal with these definitions as being okay for us? That's kind of the question we're asking. Okay, we've had one person say that, well, confidentiality is important, and if we violate confidentiality, we've violated HIPAA, which could result in fines and, of course, customer embarrassment and possible lawsuit from the customer themselves.
If we had a mission statement from Ouch, maybe we could determine what their business goal is as a hospital. Are they in the business of saving lives or following regulations?
Okay. And that really should be a question you ask before you got to this point. Right? You got to understand the organization's mission in order to effectively do this. Of course, you guys were doing this in a vacuum. We understand that. Okay. You're making it up. But it's logical decisions in the process. And so we're not going to beat up the process at the moment. Okay. So can anybody come up with words that need to go in here, or can we leave it where it's at?
I don't know exactly what words would need to be in there, but part of the thing would be I'd probably want to see a high in patient records, because if you start releasing too many records or something goes out like that, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about admissions or medication because nobody's coming to your hospital anymore because they think all their information is going to leak out.
Loss of your customer base, or a loss of significant number of customers.
But to change that, we'd have to change the whole structure of things, because high means that, that somebody might die or there's a risk for a big lawsuit. We can still keep the records confidential. Just because it's a medium doesn't mean that all that information is going to get out. I mean, we're still following HIPAA regulations and stuff shouldn't be getting out. But if it does, this is the impact that's going to have on the company.
Another way to manage this would be we could actually start putting physical figures in for monetary loss. This could be $100,000 up here, which is a large customer base. This is a $20,000 fine. So it's very small. And that would definitely allow patient records to move up to a high rather simply.
And thank you. You hit on my point. Granularity in the definitions is extremely important. Having levels of loss implemented in here would really help you a lot in terms of your definitions. So if the organization set as a high, if we lose greater than $100,000 for any reason, malpractice, fines, regulatory, fines, those types of things, that hurts me as a business. Okay, $20,000, sorry, you waste that much on the towels you throw out of the kit of 3 and you only use 2. All right, and then lows, really inconvenient losses. You also do the same thing with time for availability. Okay, if I'm down for 5 minutes on an admission machine, no big deal. It's already backed up anyhow. But if I'm down for 5 minutes on a cardiac operation machine,
Blood machine.
Blood machine, please.
lung machine, blood machine or lung machine, could that potentially be a problem? So those types of things need to be taken into account. Is use granularity in your definitions so that you can have more flexibility as you go through this, and it'll break it out better for you. Real definitions will have that granularity. Okay. So let's leave these as is for now.
Okay.
Okay. Consider adding, maybe come up with some dollar figures. Make it up. I don't care. But for the next exercises you do, just add a couple of granular pieces to it, and then we'll be able to move on from there.
Perfect.
All right. Any other questions? Everybody good? Yes, sir.
I have a question though, not related to the presentation, well, somewhat related. Every day I have this experience, and it's exactly what these 2 comments were about.
We should do that, huh?
They look at the results
What's that?
of what's up there.
Actual
And
numbers.
in their head, they expect to see something be a high for some unknown reason that we really haven't figured out here yet. And we're trying to equate it to a granularity, but really, is that what you really think it comes down to, or?
High, instead of it not really being high.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's a function that everybody wants to believe that their role in the organization, what they're doing, is important.
That's why
And
it's
that's
so.
why it ends up going high most of the
That's
time.
why it's so critical to do the definitions first before you try to start plugging it into the matrices, because there's still argument, but there's less argument when you have the definitions built in already, because then they have to justify changing the definitions, which is harder than just trying to manipulate a table so they look more important. And another key thing to point out with these matrices is, if it's important enough to be up here to begin with, it's not down in the noise low, it's a high-low kind of thing. It's important enough to make the table. Okay, so it's not ignore it kind of low, it's it's still important enough to discuss. And things need to be done to help protect that information. Okay, so if it's on the table, it's important enough to address. It's just where does it fit in terms of the definition and the impact. Remember, these are impact definitions. It's things that can happen to the organization if something bad happens. So that's why we do the definitions first. This is not an easy process. With real customers, it is not easy. And a lot of it has to do with psychology. That whole try to push my world of control higher so that I look more important. Okay? Whether it's intentional or not, that does happen, and you run into that with customers. So do this part first. Let it drive this. And yeah, you're going to have the discussions, but it's going to be minor changes as opposed to revamping the whole table. Did that come anywhere close to answering your question?
It did. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Nice job.
13.
Okay, next group.
Yeah, there's two of you guys. Take the mic.
Organization E.
That's actually who you guys are.
Okay,
So
we're
that's
still,
who you guys are.
are we still rolling, Dustin? Yep. Okay, go ahead, Nick.
All right. We had the Transit Organization of Operational Trains, also known as TOOP. It's under contract to manage 27% of all North American train traffic. In this capacity, they schedule, monitor, and enforce the movement of the trains from 6 master control stations. They're located in New York, Miami, Mexico City, San Francisco, Seattle, and Toronto.
Big cities.
25% of the trains managed by TOOP are passenger trains, with the remaining trains for various uses, such as perishable food products and critical medical supplies. Since much of the traffic is routine, consideration can be made in scheduling of critical freight. Also, of paramount importance to TOOP is safety. All train traffic is monitored by a network of track sensors, as well as transmitting devices within each train. All trains are monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by the regional master control station. The master control stations are in constant communication with each other to act as backup facilities.
So you guys have a huge infrastructure, a lot of stuff to monitor.
So
This is what we got from our talks, as far as what would be the bad things that would happen to you on different levels here. So if you want to go
high rating would be a loss of major equipment, like actual trains or sections of track, railway, loss of life, a large financial risk starting between X and Y dollar amount. Those are determined on a case-by-case basis. A medium value would be loss of customers, including business partners and clients. Loss of business value, what that business, what their name stands for. Any downtime and monetary value that's lower than high.
So a lot of what's at the medium level is the business image, how we look from the outside. So.
And the low would be just the delay in scheduling, delay in freight, passenger discomfort, and minor financial loss, nothing too great. So.
And as Dan had mentioned earlier, each level would also have its monetary loss value as well, going from a higher loss to a lower loss. That would be another way of judging some of these categories that we're probably going to in our matrix here.
So for the four, we came up with 4 categories to the most important things we found. Scheduling information would be one, including when trains would go where, on what tracks. Infrastructure information, including maintenance, who does what, where things are located, HR records of employees, and financial information. We graded them confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Scheduling information for confidentiality we thought was a medium. Sometimes you don't want everybody to know what is going where. But the integrity of that is you want to know for sure what train is on what track at what time, so you don't have any, accidents or derailments, because that'll cause a loss of major equipment, life, and a huge financial risk. And you want that information available. With infrastructure information, we thought the availability was pretty high, but the confidentiality and integrity of that was not so much. HR records, we thought confidentiality was high, but the other two, medium. And financial information, we thought the integrity should be high, whereas confidentiality and availability, medium value.
This being our first meeting, we can always expand on the upper categories on top. This, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, as well as our list of our 4 right here. We figured we'd start out with the basic, broad categories, and we can actually get into a list of the more specific categories later on. But what do you guys think so far?
I have a question. For infrastructure and the integrity, you put medium, but let's say that the infrastructure, as far as the rails and stuff like that, is not in place. Couldn't that produce a loss of life?
As far as the integrity?
The infrastructure? The integrity of your infrastructure, as far as like, I would assume it's like the railways, where the rails go and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If
Remember, it's the information about the
information about the
infrastructure.
infrastructure.
It's not the actual rail itself, it's information about
About
the
it.
rails.
Right, which is publicly available. You can go to libraries and find out where the rail systems are and stuff like that. But keeping that current, making sure that our own employees know all.
So some of the information definitely is high. However, on what we thought of as a group, most of the information we thought deserved a medium for integrity.
Under confidentiality of HR records, what information in the HR record are you protecting that drove it to high,
I was wondering about that too.
based on your definition, based on our definition?
I don't know, kind of looking back at it now, I kind of think that it was the same reason as you guys had with Ouch. I think we probably had a mindset that HR records, needed high confidentiality.
HR records, there are things like background checks that you want to protect. Otherwise, you don't want to make it well known that some guy you hired was a known sex offender in a different state or something like that.
How does that fit in with your definitions though?
Yeah.
As far as a high.
What within the definition drove it to high?
I think a lot of it was the financial risk associated with penalties or things that might have to be paid out if some of the information ended up becoming released as far as that goes. We looked at the HR records with all of the factors in it, the requirement to maintain the confidentiality of the social security numbers and the information that we would get from background checks that we were doing, those kinds of things on engineers or maintenance workers. We also looked at the fact that because of some of the material that might be transmitted on the lines, that we needed to be able to have assurance that the information on our employees was safe in order to avoid substitution, impersonation, if you will, as far as that goes, of engineers or maintenance people that could end up getting into the system and doing something that would be cause some sort of financial loss to the organization.
So what
That
you're
actually
telling
makes
me
sense,
is that the associated dollar loss would be between that X and Y dollars,
Yes.
potentially?
Yeah.
Our problem was, is that we couldn't, we were missing the fact of having somebody on the team that could represent the customer and tell us where the comfort level as far as the risk, because we bounced back, does it need to be $1 million, does it need to be more than $1 million and less than, is it bigger than a bread box or smaller than an apple kind of a thing when it came down, so that's where we ended up with a parameter of an open parameter.
Since they do own 27% of the transportation systems as far as like train systems, we figured that they would have a little bit more high, they'd have the more money to spend on security and stuff, so it's definitely something we should discuss, get together with your financial people,
All right.
get some values.
You hit on the key points. Okay. What other questions?
Is train traffic considered critical infrastructure according to executive order?
Train traffic,
Meaning this train information is passing critical medical supplies?
Right, information about
Is
the
this
actual
considered-
supplies.
Is it considered, according to the executive order, federal regulations, whatever you want to call it, critical infrastructure that has to be protected?
My understanding of the critical infrastructure requirements is that the protection of customer information is a critical area. Not necessarily what is being transported, and especially if there's some hazardous materials that are being transported, that has to be made publicly available along the routes that are being used to transport that. So if you're transporting nuclear waste on a railroad, that has to be made known. If you're transporting, not necessarily if you're transporting critical medical supplies, it's not necessarily made known, but it's not protected as
No, but I see,
confidential information.
sorry, and I'm not really talking about like HIPAA records or anything like that anymore. She brought up an interesting comment about engineers being impersonated, which starts to bring in the question of terrorism. Are we really concerned about scheduling of these trains where you start to get into information that is now available to a terrorist, where they could get in and know where these things are at? I haven't heard mention of anything to do with the sensors and what we could do potentially to those and how we're protecting that information of where trains are at, what time they go by.
That's where
And
we.
so I'm just concerned that perhaps we're not protecting the right thing. That's all.
Okay, and that's a good point.
Right, that's where we branch out and have a longer list here of specifics. We kind of lump the sensors into the infrastructure information, which would be where that information going to. Is there logs that they're keeping? Is there
Well,
history
but that's
of
what I'm getting
logs?
at, is potentially I could very viably come up with some very reasonable circumstances in which loss of life is the #1 issue I'm concerned about with scheduling and infrastructure.
You have to break
I
that
Which
out.
then by your definition would make those high.
It would only be at the.
You have to
And
break it
one
out.
of- and interrupt, one of the assumptions that we made, because it didn't mention it here, was that there was no hazardous materials being on these lines, you know,
No.
as far as that goes. And then the other assumption that we made is that under scheduling and infrastructure, and probably HR and financial, is that there were at least 4 subcategories that could have been broken out. And we had a problem with the parameters of trying to get it into 4 or 5 major categories and needing to condense that back down, because we did have that discussion that information on passengers may not necessarily be as, need to be confidential, because you want to have train schedules available, but you may want to have passenger information, the actual passengers on there confidential.
See, and I'm not necessarily so much talking about information on the passenger as much as information on the train itself. The car is
Yes,
that.
but the cargo, if you've got less than 25% of a passenger trains, you've got 75% of them that have cargo. We had to make the assumption that there wasn't hazardous materials being transmitted on there. And then the other information would need to be perhaps kept confidential if you wanted to deal with avoiding terrorism or sabotage or hijacking. That was the other thing that we were a little bit concerned about, was hijacking some of the trains that had medical supplies on them, because they do become very valuable on the black market. And you may not necessarily want to have that information freely available. And that's one of the reasons that particular category came to a higher level on the
All I'm asking is your
confidentiality.
high says loss of life. If I have 2 trains and I can schedule them to hit each other, then I've lost 2 engineers, which is 2 lives.
Is that a confidentiality or an integrity thing?
That's
Can I
getting
protect
into
the
integrity now.
confidentiality of that information? I could, and that could protect those people.
That seems like it'd be availability.
Now, availability says it's available to those that need to know.
Integrity
Confidentiality,
says that-
confidentiality is protecting against the people that don't need to know.
So that would have, someone would have to
And
social
integrity
engineer
is
somebody.
changing any of the information. I'm just saying, could I put together something that runs the 2 of them together and I lose 2 lives? It seems like we've missed the loss of life.
Okay.
Yes, that's why we put integrity high, because we believe that information was maintaining the fact that somebody couldn't get in there and change that data, so we thought that the train track was empty when in fact there was a train on it. You know, actual scheduling, since we are the ones that control the tracks as far as that goes, it would be difficult for somebody just because they had access to the knowledge that there would be a train there to actually make two trains collide. But the fact that they could get in and manipulate the data and we wouldn't know about it could end up in the situation where the trains could collide.
The situation you described, I would fit under integrity, and we already have integrity high under scheduling for that very reason, you know. Where we should probably have a brief discussion is under integrity of infrastructure information. So that goes back to the sensor question that you had asked previously. Okay, so what if the information about our sensors is altered? Okay. Well, the sensors tell us where the trains are on the track, right? If I can alter it to say there's not a train on the track, and there actually is a train on the track, and we send another one down that same track,
Okay, then it's life-threatening.
then it is very life-threatening.
And Josie too.
So-
Would the sensors fall under infrastructure information?
Yeah,
or
what
would
is
it be scheduled?
infrastructure information?
'Cause that could just be
Did
like-
you lump the sensors under infra?
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the case, that to me is a critical area where we should adjust that to a high, the integrity to a high. Confidentiality side, most of the stuff on train scheduling, especially, that's open, publicly available information. It has to be for things down the line to be prepared that when their trains are going to show up and those types of things. And also to know where they're watching on the sensors and those kind of things for purposes of the trains going through. So this, to me, and of course, everybody has different experiences, but the confidentiality side, I'm okay with it being medium. Integrity side, that's where we get critical, especially when you're dealing with trains, terrorist concerns, hijacking concerns. The integrity of the information plays a critical role in knowing where you're at along the line, both from a sensor perspective, your scheduling side of things, and the schedule and the sensors have to match, or you shut down the lines. You literally tell everybody to stop until you can sort out where everybody is. And that's happened on a couple of occasions, okay? Because power outages or systems go down or something of that nature. So really dealing with the integrity side. So I move, as president of this company, that integrity of infrastructure information gets moved to a high.
Concur.
Everybody okay with that?
Everybody else?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead and
That's
change.
something we can change right now. So.
M2 allocations anyways.
We'll make that prettier later.
Would anything that's like physical not be put up there as a system, or like say the physical sensor? Because those are all, everything up there is paperwork basically, information.
This is all information so far. Remember, we get into our systems next.
Okay.
We define our systems next. That's what we'll be presenting here in a few minutes. Any other questions? All right, good job. Okay, let me point out real quick a couple of important things. Hold that one up there for a second. Cheryl, you made a point that you were having to make guesses without a customer representative there. All right, you absolutely have to have the customer involved in this process. Okay, you can't do what we just did and make it up. You have to get their input into actually what all this stuff means, what the definitions mean. Are you going to have disagreements? Okay. Be careful with that one. You will have disagreements, but whose information is it? It's the customer's information. Ultimately, if they can't take ownership of it, you've failed in this first step. Okay. The key is the customer has to say that in the end, okay, yeah, as a consensus, you're not going to get 100% agreement, but as a consensus, this is us in the long run. So it absolutely has to be done with the customer. You're going to have many conversations, both as groups and individuals, about how all this stuff fits together, and that's with the customer. Okay? And in the end, it's going to come together as a group consensus, often led by what we call a power broker. You know, like I said over there, as president of the organization, and became a power broker, and we push this high. All right. There will be some tough decisions that have to be made, but those tough decisions are made by the organization, not you as the consultants coming in. Okay? You have to push that ownership back to them because it is their stuff. And if you can't get agreement, then you're going to have to ask somebody to make a decision within that company as to where it should fit.
So you're mainly there just for direction.
You are a facilitator. That's your whole role in life. You bring a lot of expertise into that facilitation role. And sometimes as a facilitator, you're like a dog breeder. You throw a bone in, let them fight over it for a little bit, pull the bone back out, and have the conversation. Okay? You're not trying to instigate problems, but you're trying to get them to communicate and come to a consensus as to where they actually fit. All right? That can be challenging. Okay? You have to be patient with customers. And that can be challenging sometimes, but it's a good thing to do. All right, do you have any questions? The reason you went through this was not to cause you pain and suffering. It was to give you a flavor for the things that you would miss. One, if you tried to do it all by yourself, and two, to give you a sense for what kind of discussions and conversations that you'll run into in the real world as you try to do some of these things. Okay. All right, well, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we will finish Module 2. You'll get working on your final exercise for today, and then you'll be able to go home or go to your next class, whichever works better for you.